And we want to talk about retail. Retail will be in focus today across the board. This morning, July retail sales numbers came out, and it looks like American consumers spent more at stores and restaurants last month, which is a positive indicator. The Commerce Department says retail sales rose a healthy 0.7% after just a 0.3% gain in June. Online retailers, grocery stores, clothing retailers, and electronics and appliance stores all reported strong gains. Also, Walmart and JCPenney reported earnings this morning. Walmart with a big beat on both the top and bottom lines for its second quarter. JCPenney turned in more mixed second quarter results. Joining us to discuss it all is Jon Reily of Publicis Sapient from Richmond, Virginia. Jon, thanks for coming on. Let's start with the July sales numbers. What did you make of it?
So when you remove the control group from those sales numbers, which removes cars and building supplies, that was actually a 1% increase. Those are really strong numbers showing that consumer confidence is still high. And thus far, American consumers are not being swayed by the tariff wars and other factors. Unemployment is still low. Wages are still creeping up. So in other things aside, inverse curves, et cetera, recession fears, as far as retail is concerned, things are looking pretty good right now.
See, then what's interesting about that, Jon, I'm sure you've discussed this with other people, some of our guests yesterday have the fear that headlines can actually now, moving forward, convince some people of the recession. Like, if we talk about it enough, we're going to make it happen. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. I mean, you look at some of these metrics, and things look pretty good to me, especially with the health of the U.S. consumer. So now with, yes, the momentary inverted yield curve and now the fears of a recession, how do we sort of get everyone to focus on these positive fundamentals about the U.S. economy?
Well, ultimately, if you think you're going to get sick, you're probably going to get sick. And that's, I think, what everybody fears right now in terms of recession. In terms of retail, which is what we're talking about right now, those numbers are good. People are going to continue going to stores and people are going to continue to buy as long as they feel good about the future. And tariff woes notwithstanding, that appears to be continuing to happen. There was not a revision on last month's numbers showing that things are looking good and retailers are reporting decent numbers. Walmart's, as you put it, Walmart's earnings were out of the park today. Walmart should be cracking champagne right now, and JCPenney notwithstanding, which is a different story. But e-commerce is strong. People are buying. People are going to stores. In terms of Walmart, their same-store sales were up almost 2%. Nobody's same-store sales are up any percent. So that's a real bright spot right now.
Hey, Jon, Brian Chung here. So you mentioned the tariffs notwithstanding, obviously a huge looming question as we especially face those deadlines later this year, although maybe even a little bit delayed, for more tariffs in place. So for companies that have been able to kind of absorb it in the margin, do you expect that at some point they might just have to pass the prices on to the consumer? And what would that do to the consumer?
Well, ultimately, if the 30% tariffs do take place on electronics and the 15% tariffs that are being discussed on clothing move to 30%, retailers will have to pass that on to consumers. That's absolutely going to take a bite of consumer confidence, and people perhaps will not buy as much. That said, there is a little bit of bright spot coming in the administration delaying those electronics tariffs towards the end of the year. The 15% tariffs on clothing, the Walmarts and Targets of the world can probably absorb that without passing that on to consumers. That will hurt the smaller brands, the American Eagle type companies, and companies like JCPenney more than anything else. That said, I don't think that will affect consumer confidence in the immediate term. Those 30% numbers are absolutely going to affect it.
Anna, you touched briefly on this, but I want to double down on JCPenney. What is the story going on there? I mean, their sales are plummeting, and last week they were at risk of actually being delisted from the New York Stock Exchange. So what's going on there with JCPenney?
Well, JCPenney is doing a lot of things right, but they're also facing a lot of headwinds. And there's an expression in the Pacific Northwest about everybody wants a white Christmas, but you need 50 things for it to snow. And if you get 49, you get rain. And JCPenney's experiencing a lot of those 49 versus 50 things. The tariffs will absolutely hurt JCPenney. Their reports of earnings today show that. But they're trying to make some good moves in e-commerce, which is where they should be going. I'm cautiously optimistic JCPenney can turn it around. But once again, those headwinds that are outside of their control may unfortunately write the story for them.
All right, Jon Reily of Publicis Sapient. Loved having you on. We'll have you back soon. Thanks for talking to us.
Nice to be here. Thanks for having me.